In the shadow of the Alborz Mountains, Tehran sprawls across the plateau where 40 centuries of civilization converge. Stand at Persepolis today, and the stone columns still rise from dust that remembers Darius, the Great, who built these terraces. This is Iran, a land whose story never stopped. To reconstruct this vast sweep of history visually, this video uses AI-generated imagery based on archaeological evidence and historical sources. The reconstructions are interpretive, occasionally imperfect, but they allow us to see cities and moments that no camera could capture otherwise. From the Medes, who first unified Persian tribes in the 7th century BC, through the Achaemenid Empire that stretched from Egypt to India, through conquest by Greeks, Parthians, Arabs and Mongols, through the Safavid dynasty that made Shia Islam the soul of the state, through constitutional revolutions, oil-fueled modernization, and the upheaval of 1979 that reordered everything, to recent years of isolation, conflict, and the 2026 crisis that saw a supreme leader assassinated and thousands dead in the streets. 4,000 years, one unbroken thread. This is how Iran became what it is today. The Medes swept down from the Zagros in the 7th century before Christ, uniting scattered Persian tribes into something the ancient world had never seen. A state that stretched beyond city walls. An empire built not on the ashes of conquest alone, but on the bones of Nineveh itself. In 612 BC, under Achaemenid, they ended the Neo-Assyrian Empire and announced a new power on the plateau. But the Medes were merely prelude. In 550 BC, Rus, the Great, turned vassal into master. He unified every Persian tribe under one banner and founded the Achaemenid dynasty. Within a generation, his armies had taken Lydia, Babylon, and pushed east to the Indus. This was no regional kingdom. By the 6th century BC, the Achaemenid Empire had become the largest territorial state the ancient world had witnessed. Darius, the Great, built Persepolis on the plateau, its stone terraces rising as testament to imperial ambition. He paved the royal road from Susa to Sardis, stitching together an empire that spanned 3 continents. Messengers could now cross 2,000 miles in days, not months. The machinery of administration followed, province by province. Then came Greece. Xerxes. The first invaded the mainland and briefly controlled half of it, but Plataea and Salamis shattered Persian momentum. The dream of Europe ended in the Aegean. For a century and a half, the empire endured, wealthy and vast, but the cracks had begun to show. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with 30,000 men. 3 battles: Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela. By 331 BC, the Achaemenid Empire had fallen, Persepolis burned, 2 centuries of Persian dominance dissolved in Macedonian fire. Yet the stones remained, the terraces, the columns, the memory of an empire that had rewritten the rules. Siru had shown the world that conquest need not mean annihilation, that administration could replace oppression, that an empire could govern 100 nations without erasing them. The Achaemenids fell, but the template endured. Every empire that followed would study what the Persians built, and everyone would fail to replicate it. The Seleucid grip loosened slowly. First the eastern satrapies slipped away, then the plateau itself fractured under pressure from nomadic horsemen sweeping in from the steppes. By 142 BC, when Parthian warriors seized Babylonia, a new power had emerged from the dust of Alexander's collapsing dream. The Arsacid dynasty would hold Persia for 5 centuries, not through administrative genius, but through sheer, stubborn endurance. Rome called them enemies. Byzantium learned to fear them. The Parthian heavy cavalry, encased in scale armour with their horses draped in iron, became the nightmare that haunted Roman legions from Mesopotamia to Syria. Battle followed battle. Truces collapsed into fresh campaigns. Civil wars tore the empire apart from within, whilst Rome hammered at its western frontier. Yet the Parthian state persisted, absorbing blows that would have shattered lesser kingdoms, its decentralized structure somehow surviving what centralization could not. Then in 224 AD, a provincial governor named Ardoshir revolted. He met the last Parthian king, Artabanus IV, on the battlefield and killed him. What rose in the Parthian Empire's place was something far more formidable. the Sasanian state rebuilt Persian power on foundations the Achaemenids would have recognized. A sprawling bureaucracy reached into every province. Zoroastrian priests gained authority not seen since Eswirus walked the earth. Royal inscriptions appeared in 3 languages, echoing Achaemenid proclamations carved at Persepolis 6 centuries before. The Sasanian Empire stretched from Central Asia to the Arabian sands, from the Caucasus peaks to the Indian Ocean. Merchants carried Persian silk through mountain passes, while scholars debated theology in palace halls. But Rome had become Byzantium, and the wars continued. Dynasty faced dynasty across the same contested borderlands for 4 centuries. Armies marched, cities changed hands, treasuries emptied, funding campaigns that resolved nothing. When Arab horsemen burst from the peninsula in 632, they found an empire exhausted. The last great Byzantine Sasanian War had ended only years before, leaving both powers drained. The Persian forces that had conquered Jerusalem and threatened Constantinople now struggled to hold their own plateau. By 651, the Sasanian state had collapsed entirely, its last king fleeing east towards oblivion, its territories absorbed into the Rashidun Caliphate. If this journey through Persia's empires resonates with you, consider becoming a channel member. Your support helps me keep rebuilding lost worlds, one frame at a time. Now, the faith of the conquerors would reshape everything. The Arab armies crossed the plateau in waves between 641 and 654, and the Sasanian state collapsed beneath them. But conquest on horseback proved simpler than governance on foot. The caliphs inherited an empire whose administrative machinery had evolved over centuries, whose tax systems recorded revenue in Middle Persian, whose court protocols had refined statecraft into ritual. So they kept them. Arab governors sat in Sasanian palaces, employed Sasanian clerks, collected taxes using Sasanian methods. Middle Persian remained the official language of business until the late 7th century, decades after the conquest itself. Not every valley submitted. Dalam in the north, the forested slopes around Mount Damavand, Tabaristan's coastal ranges, terrain mattered. Where mountains rose steep and paths narrowed to goat tracks, Arab cavalry lost its advantage. Local Iranian lords held out for decades, some negotiating terms, others simply outlasting caliphal patience. Conversion moved slowly. By the mid-9th century, perhaps 40% of Iranians had adopted Islam. It would take another 2 centuries to reach 90%. But something unexpected happened during that long transition. The conquered began reshaping their conquerors. Persian bureaucrats drafted Arabic administration into Persian patterns. Persian poets composed in Arabic but thought in Persian rhythms. Persian scholars translated Greek philosophy through Persian intellectual traditions. When Abbasid authority weakened in the 9th century, Iranian dynasties emerged from the margins. Tahirids first, then Sukhmanids, then Buyids, who marched into Baghdad itself and reduced the caliph to ceremonial irrelevance. They called this the Iranian intermezzo, as if it were temporary, but the pattern it established endured. Islam became Iranian as much as Iran became Islamic. The language survived, the memory persisted. A conquest that should have erased a civilization instead created something new. Persian Islam, Islamic Persia, both at once. The Mongol horsemen arrived in 1220 and the ancient cities of the plateau burned. Bukhara first, then Samarkand, then Herat. At Nishapur they killed every living thing, cats and dogs included, then built pyramids from the severed heads. The Khwarezmian Empire collapsed in months. By 1258 the storm reached Baghdad, and the Abbasid Caliphate, 5 centuries old, simply ceased to exist. The plateau lay broken. Irrigation systems destroyed, libraries ash, entire urban populations erased from the earth. When the Mongol Empire itself fractured after the death of its great Khan, Hule Gu held the western territories and Iran became the heart of his Ilkhanid state. Yet something unexpected emerged from the wreckage. The conquerors built observatories, patronized poets, commissioned histories in Persian. When Guzan Khan converted to Islam at the century's end, the Ilkhanid court became a fusion point where Mongol military administration met Persian bureaucratic tradition. The cities rebuilt, culture flowered in the ruins. Then Timur arrived in 1370, claiming descent from those same Mongol lines. His armies moved across the plateau with methodical brutality. At Isfahan in 1387, 70,000 corpses became towers of bone and mortar. Yet his heirs, the Timurids, presided over a renaissance of Persian art and learning that reached from Samarkand to Herat, a golden age built on mountains of skulls. The Turkmen dynasties that followed controlled fragments, not empires. The plateau fractured again into competing spheres, each claiming legitimacy, none achieving unity. Until 1501, when a young warrior named Ismail swept out of the north with Turkic cavalry at his back and a radical vision in his mind. He proclaimed himself Shah, reunified the Iranian lands under native rule for the first time in centuries, and declared Twelver Shia Islam the religion of his state. This was the pivot. The Safavid Revolution didn't just create an empire, it defined what Iran would become. Where the Arab conquest had brought Islam, the Safavids made Iran distinctly Shia, deliberately separating it from the Sunni Ottoman West and Mughal East. The Shahs claimed descent from the Prophet himself, ruling as both temporal kings and spiritual guides. Their bureaucracy was Persian, their army Turkic, their religion a statement of difference. The empire lasted 2 centuries before Afghan invasion brought it down in 1722, but the transformation held. When Enechder Shah briefly rebuilt a vast military state in the 1730s, and when the Qajar dynasty finally restored order decades later, they inherited a land fundamentally reshaped. Iran was Shia now, and that choice, made in 1501, would echo through every century that followed. The Qajar Shahs reunified the plateau in 1796, but they inherited a world where empires no longer collided on horseback. They came with treaties and railways and telegraph lines. Russia pressed from the north, Britain from the south. Iran lost the Caucasus in 2 wars, entire provinces signed away in humiliating treaties. By the late 19th century, the plateau had become a chessboard where foreign powers moved pieces whilst Iranians starved. The Great Famine of 1870 killed perhaps 1 million souls. Drought, yes, but also a government that had sold concessions to foreigners whilst its own people went hungry. The Constitutional Revolution of 1905 forced a parliament into existence. For 6 years, reformers fought absolutists in the streets, whilst Russia and Britain divided the country into spheres of influence by treaty. Then in 1921, an officer named Reza Shah seized power. He crowned himself in 1925, founding the Pahlavi dynasty on a promise of strength and modernity. Schools appeared, railways, a secular state that pushed back against clerical authority. But modernization came at a price. In 1941, Britain and Russia invaded to secure oil and supply routes, deposing Reza Shah and installing his young son Mohammad Reza. The new Shah struggled for control. In 1951, Prime Minister Mossadegh nationalised British oil interests. 2 years later, British and American intelligence orchestrated his removal. The Shah ruled as an autocrat after that, pushing rapid westernization that enriched some, whilst alienating vast sections of traditional society. By 1978, over 10% of the entire population filled the streets, an extraordinary number for any revolution. Secular leftists marched alongside religious conservatives united only in opposition to the throne. The Shah fled in January 79. Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile. A referendum in March approved an Islamic Republic by 99.3%. In December, Khomeini became supreme leader. The revolution that began as a broad uprising against autocracy had crystallized into a theocracy. The ancient tension between Persian identity and Islamic governance, between reform and tradition, had tipped toward a new order, one that would define Iran for the next half-century. The revolution of 1979 replaced throne with theocracy, but the plateau remained. Khomeini died in 89. Khamenei followed, holding power through reform movements and crackdowns alike. Iraq invaded in 80, beginning 8 years of trench warfare that killed 500,000. Chemical weapons drifted across battlefields where Achaemenid armies once marched. The war ended in stalemate. Sanctions followed nuclear ambitions. Protests rose and fell in waves, each met with varying degrees of force. In June 2025, Israeli warplanes struck deep into the plateau. February 2026 brought assassination. March brought succession. The mechanisms of power shifted, but the civilization beneath persisted, as it had through Mongol fire and Arab conquest. 4,000 years of cities built and rebuilt, empires rising from dust and returning to it. The columns at Persepolis still stand. The mountains frame Tehran as they framed Ecbatana. Continuity and rupture woven through millennia. The plateau endures.